In 2024, out of over 800,000 migrant workers in Taiwan, more than 10% are unaccounted for, also known as runaway migrant workers. And the reasons they run away are mainly for humanitarian issues like poor living conditions, healthcare, welfare, and wage exploitation. We covered in previous episodes about Taiwan's dire need for foreign talents and how the government is taking steps to incentivize their arrival, from setting up new government agencies and family service centers to providing counseling and language programs. But these benefits are almost exclusively for white-collar workers only, that be your product managers, market researchers, software engineers, etc. Today, we'd like to talk about their blue-collar counterparts, factory workers, fishing boat deckhands, domestic caretakers, and how they are treated. I'm your host, Joey Chou, and this is Beyond the Reefs. Today, we'll deep dive into the experiences and struggles of migrant workers. Joining us is someone who's dedicated her entire career to advocate for their rights in Taiwan, a true champion for this vital but often overlooked community. But before we get into her story, let's take a moment to set the stage with some global context about migration. Let's start with some facts about the global state of migrant workers. First up, the International Organization for Migration, or the IOM. It's a United Nations agency focused on providing operational support for migrants, refugees, and workers crossing borders in search of opportunity or refuge. According to their World Migrant Report, the majority of the world's migrant populations are concentrated in three regions: Europe, Asia, and North America. These areas are home to 87, 86, and 59 million international migrants, respectively, together accounting for a whopping 82% of the global migration population. And here's something that might surprise you. Out of these regions, Asia has seen the most dramatic rise in migrant workers. From 2000 to 2020, the number of migrant workers in Asia grew by nearly 75%. That's an increase of almost 40 million people in just 2 decades. It's a staggering statistic, underscoring the growing reliance on migrant labor to fuel economies across the region. Now, let's talk about where these workers are coming from. In North America, countries like the United States and Canada, temporary foreign worker programs draw heavily from Mexico, Central America, India, China, the Philippines, and various Caribbean nations. Migrants play a crucial role in everything from agriculture to technology. Across the Atlantic, in larger European countries like France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, most migrant workers hail from nearby EU nations like Poland, Romania, or regions like Africa, think Morocco and Algeria, and in Asia, including India and Indonesia. And finally, we have Asia's economic powerhouses, countries like Singapore, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. These nations rely heavily on migrant workers from China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia, and India. These workers are the backbone of many industries from construction to caregiving, helping to sustain rapidly aging populations and drive urban growth. So there you have it, a snapshot of the global migrant workforce. It's clear that the world's economies are intricately tied to the movement of people.
My name is Marie Yan, and I work with a media company based in the Philippines. It's called TFC, the Filipino channel, and I'm the Taiwan correspondent, and I do mainly news reports about Filipinos in Taiwan. Most of those are focused on the plight of the migrant workers in Taiwan. Second, I am a radio DJ host of ICRT, and it's for the show called Asian Nation. And with the name itself, the focus mostly is on, again, the plight of migrant workers in Taiwan, not just Filipinos, but the other Southeast Asian nations as well, like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam. So we play music, we play news. Especially in my part, I give them whatever the Workforce Development Agency under the Ministry of Labor produces for, some announcements, advisories for the migrant workers community. And I used to be a Secretary General of the Federation of Filipino Communities in Taiwan, and we deal mainly with the situation of the migrant workers in Taiwan. We help them information dissemination, fundraising, sometimes personal. I help them. They don't know where to go to if they have work related problems or beyond that. So I'm like convenience store. I can be contacted like 24/7.
Today, we're diving into an eye opening topic: migrant workers in Taiwan. We'll be peeling back the layers to explore why Taiwan has such a high concentration of migrant laborers, the challenges they face, and the systems in place that impact their lives. Later on, we'll be joined by Marie Yang, a journalist of Filipino heritage who spent her career shedding light on the experiences of migrant workers. But before we hear from her, let's break down some key facts. Let's start with this. Taiwan has the highest concentration of migrant workers in comparison to its neighbors, South Korea and Japan. If we're walking through the streets of Taiwan, 1 in every 29 people you see is likely from Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, or Thailand. Now, let's leave out Singapore for a moment. Its economy is a unique case, heavily reliant on foreign workers, international talent, and offshore investments. Taiwan, however, tells a different story. Migrant workers in Taiwan generally fall into two main categories: industrial migrant workers, those employed in construction, manufacturing, and fishing; social welfare migrant workers, who work as family helpers or provide personal and institutional care for Taiwan's aging population. Among these two groups, workers from Indonesia and Vietnam outnumber their Filipino and Thai counterparts. Why? One key reason might be the prevalence of Mandarin speakers in Indonesia and Vietnam, which makes integration slightly easier. So, why does Taiwan employ so many migrant workers? Two words: labor arbitrage. If you're not familiar with the term, let's break it down. In economics, arbitrage typically refers to buying products cheaply in one place, say China, and selling them for a profit elsewhere, like the United States. You pocket the difference as the business owner. But here's the thing: when the product isn't something like electronics or clothes, but rather low-wage workers, you encounter serious humanitarian concerns. Issues like poor living conditions, inadequate healthcare, exploitative wages, and even outright abuse. Unfortunately, Taiwan's labor brokers have become highly skilled at labor arbitrage, capitalizing on these disparities. It's no coincidence that the 800,000 migrant workers in Taiwan, more than 10% are classified as runaway workers, individuals who escape from their employers, often due to unbearable working conditions. Joining us today is Marie Yang, a journalist and advocate for migrant workers' rights in Taiwan. Of Filipino heritage, Marie has spent years reporting on the systemic challenges faced by these workers, whether in industry settings or caregiving roles. Our first question for Marie: what is the key difference between the migrant workers we've been discussing and the foreign talents that Taiwan's government has been actively recruiting under the new legislation passed in July?
The migrant workers are referred to as blue collar workers, and the white collar workers are those foreign professionals. They have special skills like foreign English teachers, engineers, IT, technology engineers, something like that. So they belong to these white collar workers. The blue collar are the migrant workers. They go through another channel because the white collar workers visa, the employer applies for a work permit and then the applicant applies for that visa using the work permit, and then they go to the local ROC mission. In the Philippines, we call it the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office, something like that. But for the case of the migrant workers, they have to go through manpower agencies in Taiwan. I mean, the company applies to the manpower agencies. These manpower agencies, they apply for the work permit. For example, the Manila Economic and Cultural Office, they ask for, job order, contract verifications and everything, and then they send it to the Philippines, and then the worker would apply to another manpower agency in the Philippines. So see the difference? It's the white collar workers can just apply easily, no need to go middlemen. You no need to pay a huge amount of placement fees or service fees, while the blue collar workers or the foreign migrant workers, they have to go through all this process. The employers in Taiwan will pay the manpower agencies in Taiwan to do the legwork, and then the worker in like Vietnam or Indonesia or the Philippines, the worker will have to pay a lot of money to the local agency in the Philippines. Although there is already a law to allow direct hiring, but for the industry sector, I think you have to apply to the government again, and very few companies would do that kind of thing because it's a lot of work to do.
Let's talk about money, specifically the wages migrant workers in Taiwan are earning. As of September, Taiwan's minimum monthly salary has been adjusted to approximately 900 US dollars. Now, while that doesn't sound like much in some countries, in Taiwan it's enough for a double income household to raise a family comfortably. For migrant workers, though, it's a very different story. On average, they earn between 400 and 700 US dollars a month, depending on the industry. That's 45% to 75% of Taiwan's minimum salary. A stark gap that underscores the economic disparity between local and migrant labor. Now, here's another question to consider. How much do you think migrant workers have to pay in placement fees and service fees to get their jobs? Let's take Filipino migrant workers as an example. To secure a job in Taiwan, workers often pay upfront fees of about 70,000 NT dollars. That's over 2,000 US dollars. For context, it is equivalent to 3 months' salary for an average Taiwanese earner. But here is where it gets even more troubling. Many agencies offer loans to cover this fee. Sounds helpful, right? Well, when workers arrive in Taiwan, they often find that the loan they took out is actually much more, maybe sometimes up to 120,000 NT, nearly 3,800 US dollars. That's almost double what was advertised back home in the Philippines. By then, it's too late because they have already arrived on the foreign shores of a new country. Under this system, migrant workers are placed on a 3-year repayment plan with loan installments deducted directly from their salaries. As a result, their actual take-home pay is far less than what appears on paper. And because this is managed by brokers, the real numbers often go unreported, leaving the government largely unaware of the extent of the problem. Here's another question. Under Taiwan's labor laws, how many years do you need to work to qualify for a pension? In other words, how long must you pay into employment insurance and benefits before you can collect these funds when you retire? The answer is 15 years. But this brings us to a crucial follow-up. How many years are migrant workers actually allowed to stay in Taiwan? That's where our guest, Marie Yang, comes in. She's going to help us unpack this disparity and explain the impact it has on migrant workers who dedicate years of their lives to Taiwan's economy.
Currently, a blue collar worker or a migrant worker can stay in Taiwan for 12 years maximum for those working in the industrial sector, like those factories. And then some agricultural workers would also qualify for that. And the only exception are the live in caregivers, where they get to stay in Taiwan a maximum of 14 years. So after that, they need to go back home and will not be able to come back to Taiwan until, in April 30th, 2022, the Ministry of Labor implemented the long-term retention of skilled foreign workers program. And this applies to industries that already hire foreign workers, so including those in the manufacturing sector, slaughterhouse industry, construction, agricultural, and the long-term care sector, those in the nursing homes. But you know what? There are still restrictions, although this already allows those migrant workers to stay beyond 12 years or stay beyond 14 years, but there is a quota. For manufacturing sector, it's only 25% of the total workforce of the foreign workers, something like that. For families to retain their, we call it household service workers or live-in caregivers, as long as you can pay a minimum 26,000 new Taiwan dollars to your caregiver. And then the other eligibility is that she needs to get a Mandarin language proficiency certificate accredited by the government. But you know what? Because the current salary of live-in caregivers, according to the law, is only 20,000 new Taiwan dollars. So I guess some normal Taiwanese families could only pay as much as 20 or 24,000, something like that. And then another problem, the Ministry of Labor did a lot of work to better the situation of the blue collar workers. But you know what? Up until now, the problem really is the live-in caregivers and the household service workers, because they are not a part of the standard labor law. Most of the employers don't give them their day off. I know a lot of workers who are not allowed to go on a holiday for 3 years. They are human. They experience stress, and you want to be with friends even for like once a week. The labor insurance stipulates that when workers, even if they went back to their home country, they can apply for one-time lump sum pension. It's not a monthly payment, but they have to come to Taiwan. If they are still alive by when they turn 65 years old, they can come to Taiwan, file for the insurance benefits, but it's not a pension. Unfortunately, only those in the manufacturing sector, the construction, they are the only ones who have been under the labor insurance. The live-in caregivers and the household service workers, unfortunately, are not yet included in the Standards Labor Act of Taiwan. And that is very unfortunate, because for how many years now, those non-government organizations, the migrant advocates, they have been pressing for the government to include live-in caregivers under the standards labor law. But up until now, they are not. And that's why there are so many laws which cannot be implemented, which are in violation. But on May 2022, the government already put in place Occupational Accident Insurance and Protection Act, where everybody, the employers are mandated to apply their workers through this insurance program. But of course, it's a lot. There is no pension benefit and the like. This is only protecting them while they are working, occupational accident and protection. But that's already a huge quantum leap for, before 2022, because these workers are not protected at all.
Taiwan plans to increase the minimum salaries for foreign domestic workers after years of stagnation. Monthly pay will rise to the equivalent of around $670, up from the current $570. While minimum wages for Taiwanese workers are regularly adjusted, salaries for foreign domestic workers have not seen an increase for 7 years. There are over 670,000 migrant workers in Taiwan. 220,000, hailing mostly from Indonesia, are employed as domestic helpers.
And besides better pay, what are some other things the government could be doing to improve conditions for these workers?
The first one, to cover the domestic workers under the Labor Standard Act. Number two, the government should cover the caring workers, especially those in the house, under the long-term caring system, to be under the Ministry of Healthcare. So their welfare, their salary, their working hour could be estimated under the long-term caring system. Number three, the taxation system should be changed. Now, most of the tax or the national revenue in Taiwan are from the workers' income tax. The money from the business tax is relatively very small. So the government should raise the tax from the business part. This will be one of the most fundamental thing to do to raise the government's money so they can have more budget to do the social welfare system, to make a better long-term caring system.
That was a report from Taiwan's English news channel, Taiwan Plus. And if you would like to follow more on the state of Taiwan's migrant workers, I urge you to visit the website tiwa.org.tw. That stands for Taiwan International Workers Association.org.tw. Taiwan relies on migrant workers, but must address wage gaps, unethical placement fees, and systemic barriers. Protecting their rights is not just humane, but essential for a sustainable and fair labor system. Coming up next week, let's speak with a professor from Taiwan's new source country of migrant workers, India, and cover the increased diplomatic and trade relations between the two countries, with a focus on geopolitical strategy, mainly versus China. I'm Joey Chou. and you've been listening to Beyond the Reefs.